Hello everyone and welcome back to the Ryan Retro channel. In today's video we're going to be looking at Windows gaming through GameHub on the KONKR Pocket Fit. This is the G3 Gen 3 version, 12GB of RAM and 256GB internal storage. When you install Steam games through GameHub, they do install to the internal storage. So after installing 100 or 200GB of games, I run out of space. So I then put about 500GB more games through the SD card. So we're going to begin testing games that are installed through Steam in GameHub, and then we'll switch over to the games that I carried over onto an SD card. For all of these tests, I'm using maximum performance mode with the fan on high and the refresh rate on 144. But I have a suspicion this is just the cap and it's still automatically changing depending on what's on screen, because some low frame rate games are buttery smooth. GameHub installs the games into a 720p container, and I've just kept that as it is for all of the games today. I found that I don't really see much of a difference between 720p and 1080p on a display this size for PC games. And when I tested games, I also didn't notice too much of a frame rate difference either. So you can feel free to increase this to 1080p if you wish. I was too lazy to go through and do this for every single game, so I'm just keeping it completely default how GameHub gives it to me with the 720p resolution and the Turnip 25.0.0 revision 1 driver. The only thing that I've changed is turning off the frame limit, which caps the games to 60 frames per second. Let's see if we can find any enemies to hit here. Oh, hello. It looks like they found me. Let's try that again. So we're getting around 40 frames per second here, but it feels very, very smooth, which is probably something you're going to hear me say a lot today, because I found the frame rate doesn't actually matter that much. Bioshock Infinite runs at around 70 to 80 frames per second, but can drop down into the 40s depending on the area. But it seems to mostly be running pretty well so far. Skyrim gives us around 60 frames per second, sometimes a little bit less. I'm surprised this one's not running better, to be honest. And I feel like we could probably get a much better performance if we tinker with the settings a little bit. 50 frames per second is okay for me for now. Let's just fight this bear. Let's move on to the next game. Mirror's Edge is the game that for some reason has trapped me in an 800 by 600 window and might have the slowest camera movement of any game ever. But thankfully it does have a button to swivel on the spot, so that kind of does rectify it a little bit. It's a cool game, good for doing parkour and running around. And being an old game, especially running at such a low resolution, there shouldn't be any issues getting a nice 60 frames per second here. But there might be some issues living. I ran the Tomb Raider benchmark and we got an average frames per second of 93 with a minimum of 69. Nice. So as you can see, that should be very playable on here. And we will also, of course, get perfect performance from small games like Evoland and Coromon, which I just picked up in a recent Humble Bundle. I just played through the tutorial of this, and I really like it already. It's a complete rip-off of Pokemon, but it's cute and fun. And no issues getting a smooth frame rate on a little game like this. And with these games running well, I have spent so much money on Steam in the past couple of weeks buying Steam games. I had to pick up Zefyr, A Thief's Melody, when I saw it on sale. It has an art style that kind of reminds me of Zelda, kind of reminds me of Dragon Ball Z. It looks really nice, but this one unfortunately doesn't run very well. It has those kind of cel-shaded looking graphics which always seem to be a real resource hog and seem to always be quite difficult to get running smoothly. So this one we are stuck in the 20s with the frame rate, so definitely not the smoothest experience. We do have a pet bald eagle called Boris, so that's pretty cool. But as you can see here, the frame rate is not that great. It's a bit below 30. We will see soon that there are some games getting around 30 frames per second that feel very smooth. But this one definitely feels quite laggy and is unfortunately not the best experience. If we could just get a little bit more power, maybe with an 8 Elite device, then we might get a smooth experience. But right now, this one seems a little bit out of the reach of what we have here, unless of course we can get some better performance with a different driver. Here we're now dropping down to around 14 frames per second and the slowdown is very noticeable. This is a game I might have to play on my Steam Deck. For these next few clips, I had my microphone turned off like an idiot, so I'm going to record a voiceover now just for the next few games. So here is Megabonk, a new game that I picked up a few days ago. It's basically a 3D Vampire Survivors. It's really fun and it's working pretty well here. We're getting a frame rate somewhere in the 30s, but if you look at the frame graph here, it is perfectly smooth. There are no jumps or troughs. It is running a pretty solid 30 to 35 frames per second, which is what I think makes it feel so smooth. If you're just looking at the FPS number, you're going to assume it's not running very smoothly, but it is in fact running pretty nicely. And I will talk more about this in a game later in this video. I just picked up the game Peak yesterday, but unfortunately it doesn't seem to be very playable. Only getting around 16 frames per second at the beginning of the game, I don't think we're going to get a smooth frame rate out of this one. I'm saving the rest of my internal storage space to try to run Battlefield 6 like an idiot, so we're now going to switch over to the games that are running from the SD card. Hollow Knight Silksong is running well over 200 frames per second, so we are maxing out the 144Hz refresh rate on this KONKR Pocket Fit screen, and it looks glorious. I tested out 1080p on this game, which dropped the frame rate down to around 170 to 180 frames per second, but I didn't really notice any difference in the quality of the visuals, so that's why I decided to keep all of the games at 720p. Hades 2 is running somewhere between 40 and 60 frames per second, usually somewhere in the 50s, and it feels nice and smooth. The original Hades 1 is running well over 200 frames per second, generally around 220 to 240, even sometimes going above 300 frames per second. This is just a beautifully smooth experience. Speaking of running over 300 frames per second, Cuphead is absolutely bonkers, running well over 300 frames per second, and during easy loading screen passages, even sometimes going above 500 or 600 frames per second. This is extremely smooth, it looks beautiful, and it's definitely a game I can recommend running on these devices. But then on the opposite side of the spectrum, we're only getting around 30 frames per second in GTA 5, which is really surprising, because this is a game you can run on a McDonald's chicken nugget handheld. I'm sure with some more tinkering we can get a good frame rate out of this, because it's usually an easy game to run. And thankfully, from the next game, my microphone is back on. Speaking of games not running particularly well, we have around 11 FPS here in Elden Ring, although it seems a lot closer to half an FPS, as we are barely even able to load anything whatsoever. This is dreadful. And now if you think that is bad, even just trying to get through the menus of Cyberpunk is at around 4 to 9 FPS. It's basically impossible to even get into the game, it's that slow. So we're clearly not going to be dethroning the Steam Deck anytime soon, but let's jump into the lighter titles that make more sense to be playing on a device like this, something like Tiny Bookshop. We're able to navigate around this game using the controller, but this is also a game that works well with a mouse. So if we turn on the Ayaneo keyboard and mouse mode, we can also use the virtual mouse to control this game. Although I do find the left click is quite delayed, and I find using the screen as a touchpad to be far more smooth. But it is nice we have the option there if you would like to do that. This game runs at well over 144 frames per second, so we can max out our screen here, although a slow, story-driven game like this really doesn't need more than 60 frames per second, and I think even 30 would be fine for a game like this. So all of these extra frames we're getting are just a nice bonus. Here is a game I bought on Steam just this morning. It's called The Home County, and it's an early access game kind of like Stardew Valley, but if Stardew Valley was set in the English countryside. It has a really early access feel to it. All of the UI elements don't really feel completely fleshed out and finished yet, but it has a cute charm to it, and it runs easily at over 60 frames per second, so it's nice and smooth, and a great candidate for something like this. This is Monster Hunter Stories, and this is the game that has made me so confused about what I thought I understood about frame rates. Here the frame rate is somewhere in the 30s, which sounds really low, but it's also extremely solid. You can see the frame rate graph barely ever moves, and it feels incredibly fluid. I never thought I would ever think in my life that 35 frames per second was smooth. In my head, 60 frames per second is smooth, 30 frames per second is not enough. But with this game, it feels so smooth. If I didn't see the frame rate counter there, I would think this was at least 60 frames per second, maybe even 90. So if somebody in the comments could please tell me what is going on, I would greatly appreciate that. Is it because of the smoothness of this graph? Is it a variable refresh rate on the KONKR? What is happening that's making 30 frames per second so fluid? I would really love to know that. It's somehow very smooth despite the frame rate. It looks beautiful on this screen, and if I turn the volume up, it sounds great as well. So this kind of game is exactly what we should be playing on devices like this. It just looks, sounds, and runs beautifully. So that was some Windows gaming on the KONKR Pocket Fit. Please give me a like and subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know what you think about it down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Bye.